So I'm a retired librarian. I published a nonfiction, Dressing the Naked Hand, World's Greatest Guide to Making, Staging, and Performing with Puppets, because I was a librarian, a children's librarian for years and years, and I just documented everything I possibly could. And it actually ended up being a #1 Amazon new release. And we've been asked to do the next edition coming out in a year or two. Currently own a massive barn, but my passion is story analysis, working with the Farmer System of Narrative Analysis. And it's working on the textbook with the professor, and it's my absolute joy.
I'm Lani Forbes. I'm a young adult fantasy author, and I wrote the Age of the Seventh Sun series, which book 1 came out February of last year. Book 2 comes out on Tuesday, which I'm really excited about. And book 3 will be releasing next year through Blackstone Publishing. I was a middle school teacher for 10 years, and I'm recently transitioning into finishing a master's degree in clinical psychology and writing full-time, while having 2 young children and being pregnant at the same time. So I'm very ridiculously busy.
That sounds like plenty there.
Lots of conflict.
Yeah, lots of conflict.
Run a barn, have borders. Just enough said.
What can you give some examples of types of conflict that we'll typically see in fiction? Type of relationship conflict, kind of the different layers of conflict you can have when you're writing a story.
So I'm really gonna probably feel the lack of having my whiteboard, because I just have to draw it. But in the analysis that we do, we base a lot of it. It's a character-centered approach, and you have your primary actor. That's who it's actually about. You have your central viewpoint character, who is your conduit to the story. This is the eyes and ears, and who's actually telling the story. Might be the primary actor, might be somebody different, like Wilbur telling Charlotte's story in Charlotte's Web. But down there at the bottom of the cone is the primary norm breaker. And stretching up to the top is your system. And we call that line between your basically what we would consider in regular terminology, protagonist to the antagonist, is a line of antagonism. And it's the axis of antagonism. And you'll find that's really, really interesting. Everybody on that line is in danger. Your allies on either side. Think of the commanders, ship commanders that Darth Vader up the top system. The ship commanders, hey, he just, with a thought can choke them. Or Han Solo and Princess Leia down the end with Luke as the norm breaker. Han Solo and Princess Leia, they're allies. And everybody, the droids, that tension running up and down is critical to any story. And, well, we can go on a little bit further, but I'd love to hear from you, too.
Yeah. I was going to say, for me, like when I first kind of approaching a story, I try to look at conflict in kind of one of 3 ways. I look that you can either have conflict between characters, you can have conflict with nature, kind of that, like, man versus man, man versus nature, and then the idea of like man versus self, that you can have internal conflict as well. And so being a novelist, obviously I tend to lean a little too heavily on like the internal conflict that goes on, which is super important for any character, especially like your main protagonist, that they have some kind of internal conflict going on, a story arc. But I think sometimes if I'm knowing that my novel is feeling like it has that tension it needs to have, usually it's because I haven't put enough emphasis on the character or man versus nature conflict. And so I think it's really important as novelists to make sure that we balance that internal conflict with the external conflict as well, of, our character is going up against other characters. They are dealing with relationships with other characters, but then they're also facing obstacles of whatever the plot may be, whether it's in Lord of the Rings, where Frodo's going through the bog with these, dead bodies floating in the bog. That's a pretty scary obstacle that comes from the environment and the setting. So I think it's really important as writers, specifically and storytellers, is to make sure that we balance that internal conflict with external conflict. Because I think if you rely too heavily on one or the other, it can lose some of that overall tension that pulls you through the rest of the story.
One of the things that we have found is if you don't have an actual character that your protagonist is going up against, you don't have a person in that, it reduces the tension dramatically. It's like if you were to have Star Wars New Hope and instead of Darth Vader, you just had the Empire. You lose so much of the value and the just absolute gripping tension that you get by actually having Darth Vader. And what I find when I work with a lot of people doing their stories, it's surprising. Well, and maybe it's just because I was children's librarian, so I get a lot of children's stories. So many of the stories I get, there's no actual character antagonist that the main character is going up against.
Yeah, I think that's super important because if you don't have that focused character that can kind of represent tension, you can lose so much of that. And even if it is something that's simply like man versus nature, like a survivalist kind of story, you have to really almost personify or kind of characterize the setting a little bit so that it almost becomes this opposition. Because I mean, if you think about like the hero's journey, you think of the whole purpose of story is we come to a story to see how our character overcomes conflict and tension and difficulty, because that's what's so powerful about stories. It encourages us to overcome our own challenges. And like we see, it's so much about how does this character overcome it? Because a lot of times we may know that the character is going to overcome whatever the conflict or tension is, but paying attention to how they do that is so important, because that's really where the heart of the story is. It's like, okay, I know, at the end, Luke is probably going to defeat Darth Vader, but how does he do that? And how does that happen? And what does it cost in the meantime? And, that's where so much of the story is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how he grows throughout that. Because if they don't grow through all that opposition, you're not going to believe that they could have actually won. Yeah. It's like they have to. It's the growth arc. It's the thing that actually shows us that this person is worthy and capable of defeating our antagonist. And I apologize. The dog Abacus is very sad that he's locked out.
Yeah, I might have a lot of conflict and tension going on right there.
Oh my goodness. Okay, he walked away. So.
Well, I think that, like you said, the growth arc is so crucial, because a lot of times we come to a story looking at it as like, okay, this is the character changing. But if we think about human nature, we tend to not like to change. We don't like change, and we tend to like to stay where we're at, even if it's uncomfortable, even if we're not really happy. A lot of times it takes some kind of catalyst or prodding or conflict or tension to come along and make us change. And I think that's why.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why it's so important to make sure you design. Like I always like to try to just make sure I design my conflict ahead of time, of what is going to make this character finally change and break out of this pattern. What is it going to take to make Luke Skywalker finally leave Tatooine and not just stay there and grumble?
Whiny kid.
Exactly. Something has to create enough tension and conflict that it's going to force them on this path to change. Because, like I said, as humans, our nature is we don't like to change. We don't want to do it.
And I can relate. I mean, everybody says Luke is a whiny, yes, he's kind of whiny. But when I look at myself and I am facing something like my water line breaks, I want to throw a tantrum. I don't want to deal with it right now. I had plans,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the standing up and going.
Converted to Tashi Station.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Or sorry, from Tashi Station. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt there.
No,
I said so one, because this panel is a little bit more than just because we have novels and then you have film and other mediums of storytelling. Do you think do you see any way that there's a difference in how you build that tension as a storyteller based on the medium?
I think pacing is critical. It's and of course, film, you've got such a shorter amount of time, and you have to show it. I'm trying to work this through because I am working on some screenplays and adaptations from novel to screenplay, and you've got just 60 pages basically, or 200 pages in a film, in a screenplay, versus so many more in a book. It's a lot harder to do. You have to really pick and choose what you're going to show on the screen, and a lot of it's when you're writing a screenplay, it's not just all, you're writing dialogue, but there's so much more to it. And I think choosing the right actor makes a huge difference. Sorry, coming at it from a development perspective, I should come at it from a movie, viewer, but go ahead, and what's your opinion?
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right that it's the key difference between like a novel and a more visual medium is obviously the visual aspect that, unless you have a movie like Enola Holmes where the character like turns to you and talks to you directly as the audience, breaking that fourth wall, it's really hard to know, like, what is this character thinking? What are they doing? And, what's actually going on inside their head. And that's where so much of, conflict and tension may happen, especially like emotionally with, especially if there's conflict within the character or even conflict between characters. And so you have to figure out a way to show that conflict behaviorally. And I think that's also applicable to writing novels as well, because I think if we just, that old idiom of show don't tell that we say with writing is we want,
and now we have to show.
yeah. And so when I'm writing a book, I try to think very cinematically of, if this were a movie or if this were a show, if I were watching this scene unfold as a spectator, how would I know what's going on without necessarily being inside that character's head? Especially if you're only in one character's POV, how do I know what the other characters are thinking and feeling? And so, yeah, I think I think being able to imagine and picture visually what's going on, I think, is so helpful. You said imagining it as a movie, imagining it as a show, because yeah, I think how the character behaves, how they react, those are all ways that we can show conflict and tension without necessarily being inside their head and knowing their thoughts.
I'm going to open a gate really quick. But yes, well, if I can, I'll wait for it. If I just disappear really quick, it's just they're just staring at me like, what are you doing, Mom? Talk about conflict and tension. Oh my goodness. Anyway, with movies,
I agree with the commenters agree with the dog.
That's awesome. I really, I have to admit, I love movies almost more than I love the novels, just because I can get into it so quick. And I get a little impatient, I guess. And, just building up in a book to the inciting incident. And usually with movies, they know that they're working with a short attention span. And so I love it when I can jump right into it. I get a little bit about the person, but sometimes you just get the big bam inciting incident right at the very beginning, and you're just on the edge of your seat. And I just relish these well done movies that do it. And I'm sorry, but one of my favorite ones, and Hitman's Bodyguard, they did such a good job with that. Yes, I wish it wasn't quite as raunchy, rated R. I don't know if it's rated R, but it could be. If it's not, it should be. But something like that, or just the tension of in The Martian, when Mark Watney is abandoned on Mars. There's not that's a great example of not having an actual system character that he's up against. He's up against Mars, though. and Mars will do
it is a formidable opponent.
Yeah. And the fact that he overcomes is just tremendous. I mean, the theme of that movie is, I will survive. And he has to go through so much to survive. So well done. Anyway, just some of my favorite things that I enjoy. I do still enjoy books. I just don't have a lot of time to get into it. And then because of my own book, the Dressing the Naked Hand, we do a lot of skit kind of things, with the puppets. And I really detest Punch and Judy. I really do. I just think that it's not what I want my kids to watch. But still, there's, even in just a short little skit like that, you've got to have that tension. You've got to have something that has to be overcome. And you can't lose it just because you're doing something short or, don't think, oh, this is just for kids or something. You've got to have that antagonism going on.
And I think for me, one of the main ways that we create that tension, because like you said, in a show like with puppets, I can imagine you're like, oh, well, how do I create tension? Well, I'll just have this one punch the other one and ta-da, tension. And I think there's a temptation sometimes to do that in story too, of like, oh, there's not enough tension here. I'll blow something up, or I'll
kill somebody off.
Yeah, I'll kill somebody off. And that isn't necessarily what we're talking about with conflict and tension.
Nice.
Those poor puppies. They're like, we just want to be with you, Mom, so bad.
But they don't know quite how to react. Okay.
But yeah, that perfectly illustrates my point. The puppies, there's so much tension because they love you and they care about you so much. And I think that's what's really important when we're creating tension. Is it's not just conflict itself that creates tension. We want to have some kind of emotional component going on there as well. There's always kind of this layer of like external and internal. And I think when we care about the character, like I said, just watching a character go up and punch the other one, we may not really care about that. We're like, okay, I don't really know these characters. Why? Who cares? But if you establish that like the other one just stole like the other one's most prized possession in the world, that like depends on the future of the world depends on them having this item, then that explains the punch a little bit more, and we're invested a little bit more emotionally. So I think making sure that when we have the action conflict, that there is that underlying tension of like, why is this happening? Why is this happening right now? And why do we care about it? And why do the characters care about it specifically?
Yeah.
Could there be a point when you have, as you're adding your tension, that you've gone a little bit too far in adding your conflict to the tension?
I don't mean to be the one that keeps starting you, so I should let you have a turn back. When
Both of you doing fine.
I know. Tension. He wants me to play ball. Yeah, which is very distracting. When I think gratuitous violence is when you've gone too far. But you really have to know your audience. When you're looking at the cognitive development, the age level of your audience, and their moral reasoning and what they kind of expect, some like what's one of the shoot 'em up kind of stories where it's all action versus like Da Vinci Code, where there's a lot of action and a lot of tension, but it's very, very it's calmer, but still edge of your seat. And you go, there's all these, there lull, and then you have the action, and lull and have the action. I think you run into a problem if you don't let your viewers or your readers breathe. I think they need to, who does it best? Jaws, right? I mean, right there towards the very end, you get this calm, they're chatting around on a table, or you get some normal life kind of things, which highlights the dichotomy of having boom, shark, come and, jump out of the water. It's because I do work with people that say, well, I just want somebody on the edge of their seat constantly. I don't want them to ever have a chance to breathe. And I think that you lessen the impact of your conflict and your tension by doing that.
Yeah, one of the things I love about like the Marvel movies is that they do a really good job of breaking up tension with humor specifically. Like as I watch the Marvel movies, I'm always amazed at like how it'll be like the most tense scene in the world, and then like Captain America makes this joke and you're just like, what? But it works so well because it's like you're dealing with such intense emotional, content. I think I recently just watched the Captain America Civil War, and like you're watching literally Tony Stark and Steve Rogers like develop this tension is building throughout the whole movie of like they're gonna end up clashing at some point, and then when it finally happens, it's so tense and it's so emotional because you care so much about both of these characters and you see both of their perspectives so clearly. But I feel like they did a really good job of kind of easing some of that tension a little bit with the humor. Especially like in that airport scene. My favorite scene of the whole movie is the airport scene where like you've got these characters that you love all of these characters so much, and they are literally coming into this huge battle against each other. But then at the same time, like Spider-Man can't stop talking, and the one guy has to be like, dude, you don't talk this much during a fight. And or they throw in these funny little comments about, Ant-Man gets really huge and starts like, or, he throws the truck and it blows up and he's like, oops, sorry, I thought that was a water truck. Just these little moments of literally you've got these characters you love and care about, like potentially going to kill each other, yet it's at the same time, because they threw in these little bits of humor and stuff, it almost like makes it a little more palatable. So where you're not, like you said, to where I think our nervous systems can only take so much. And so we need a little bit of a break sometimes thrown in there too.
Yeah. Critical to have the calm before the storm.
Yeah.
So when you're building the inciting incident that drives the story forward, how do you find you can start building that tension with that incident?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, finally, yes, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm always, especially when I'm sitting down to write a story, I'm always very purposeful in my planning about trying to look at my setting and the story and my characters. And I try to design it in a way before I sit down to write of what is going to create the most tension. Like what kind of character would I want to put in this scene? Or if I start, because some people start with like a character or they start with like a scene or a setting. And so I can kind of start with either, but whichever one I start with, when I'm purposely designing the other, I try to think what would create the most tension for this character, or what kind of character would create the most tension in this situation. So for example, in my book, The Seventh Son, it's a fantasy based on ancient Mesoamerican mythology. And so I knew I wanted to create this world that was very ritualistic. They believe you have to follow these rules or else literally the world is going to end. And so in that setting, I wanted to think what kind of character would create the most tension in a world like that. And the answer is a character that really struggles with this idea of following the rules. And so right off the bat, when we first meet my main character, Mayana, she is this character that is really struggling with, she doesn't understand why they have to follow some of these rules. She's frustrated with that she has to. And yet literally this world is, if you don't do this, the world will end. And so that just immediately off the bat creates this tension. But I went into that purposely designing my character, knowing that that would create a lot of tension. And so, and then later on in the story, you get basically my story's, I joke that my story is kind of a Bachelor meets the Hunger Games, because the emperor's just died and the prince has to choose a wife who's going to be his new empress, but then the daughters that don't get chosen are going to be sacrificed. And so, of course, my main character is now, not only is she in this like tension-filled world anyway, but now she has to go to this competition where she literally has to like win the prince's heart. But she's in this world where like her views are viewed as like heretical, and that she's like a total, she completely violates everything that they believe and stand for. And so she has to kind of hide that. And so for me, that inciting incident is really forcing her against her will and putting her in this situation where she is going to just face so much conflict and tension just because of who she is in this environment that she's in.
And that was so well said. When we do the analysis, you're doing that exactly, just perfect. I can see why you're published. Because an inciting incident is like the world is that you come to is like a pond, and there's ripples, and there's something underneath the water, and you don't, but everything's kind of a stasis. The inciting incident is like somebody takes a massive boulder and just throws it into the pond. An asteroid hits, whatever. And I have a dog trying to crawl under the table. Anyway, with a massive rock. Anyway, so that rock hitting the pond, I mean, just think of the waves that crash out, the splashes, the noise, the chaos, the everything. That's what's taking part in your story. That's what's happening, is this huge change. And for a norm breaker, for it to be a really important story, that pre-pond, the pre-boulder, they're pretty much on a path of destruction before they're holding it together. They're in danger, and if things don't change, they're basically going to die. They're going to be cut out. Whatever it is, they're not going to survive. And so this big boulder that comes in and upsets their world and changes everything, that's your inciting incident, that big, massive thing. When you finish your story, the pond has settled back down. There may still be some underlying tension, but there's a new level because you've added to it. And one of the things that I find that is incredibly critical that we also tend to forget, because we like to draw our readers in with something really wow and resolve that and move on to the real story, that's a mistake. When you have to, whatever that inciting incident is, your hero moment is when that inciting incident is resolved. That is your wrap up. And that's what makes a story feel complete and not just that you were cheated in a story and somebody pulled you in and did a bait and switch, I guess is what it's called.
Yeah. I love how you pointed out how the inciting incident kind of like ups that tension, because a lot of times, people want to jump right into the inciting incident. And I think it's really important. I'm a firm believer in the hero's journey specifically. Yes. And so I love the idea of you have to kind of show your hero in the world before whatever this big event is. And yeah, because the whole purpose of showing them before is to, one, make you empathize with the character. And I recently went to a fantastic workshop that talked about how in the very first time you meet your character, like the very, very beginning, when you first meet a character, your job is to get the reader to care about them. And how do you do that? And he kind of shared how that there's like kind of 5 main ways that you can kind of make us care about the character right off the bat. And if you don't make us care about the character right off the bat, we're not going to have that tension or really care or connect when that inciting incident happens. And so like his 5 main ways that we do that was you have to show the character in jeopardy of some kind. Show them in some kind of peril. My husband and I just watched The Mummy last night. And when you first meet Brendan Fraser, he's on a battlefield and he's getting shot at and he's getting chased. And I don't know anything about him, but I'm worried about him because he's in danger. And that's kind of scary.
And he's so adorable. I love Brendan Fraser.
He is adorable as well. And so you show the character in jeopardy. You show them you show us feeling, you have to show something that makes us feel sorry for them. Like in Aladdin, you see everybody kind of being mean to him because he's a street rat and nobody will, you're only, when you die, only your fleas will mourn you kind of thing. And he's in this really kind of sad situation where he's trying so hard. And you feel sorry for him because he's kind of this homeless street rat on the streets who nobody cares about. And so you either show them in jeopardy, you make us feel sorry for them, or you show them doing something really, really likable. And I think if you can do all 3 of those, that's even better.
Then he's golden.
Yeah, like that, what they call the kind of the save the cat moment, where you show that this character is a really good person. Like when Aladdin does finally steal his, gets his dates or whatever, he sees these homeless children on the side of the street, and he gives
And
it,
he gives it to them.
he
Yeah.
gives it to them, and so automatically, like, you start to care about this character because you're like, oh, he's a good person, he's got a good heart. And then, so those are kind of the three main ways that I learned.
Then you're really invested when he ends up with all of his trouble.
Exactly. So those are kind of the three main ways. And then the other two ways that the workshop said you can add in to like make you care more, but usually these don't kind of work on their own, is show them having a good sense of humor, because we tend to like characters that are funny, or show them as really, really competent at something. So make them like a phenomenal detective, or you show them really, really skilled at something. And that usually we tend to like characters that are really skilled or talented. And so if you can find a way to combine like all five of those, then like go for it. But at least use one of the first three. And that right off the bat helps us connect with the character so that we care when they start facing these challenges against other characters, against nature, against whatever it is. And so the whole
it establishes when you learn about them, it establishes how underdog or norm breaking they truly are, and how they don't fit in that system. That system needs to have a hero that changes everything for everybody else.
Yeah. And so you have to establish that at the beginning. And like you said, show them discontented in some way. They think life's fine. They think life's great, but something's not quite right, or something's not going well for them. And now we care about them, so that by the time whatever this inciting incident comes along that's going to just completely shake up their world, we care. And then we want to design, once we care about this character and we know this character a little bit better, we want to try to design conflicts that will specifically hurt that character as much as possible.
Right? We've got to cry for him. I mean,
hurting your character as much as possible. So we get past the incident, and then you get to, I think a lot of authors call it the murky middle, because you're like, okay, what do I do now? I know you might know, okay, this conflict is going to lead to this awesomely epic thing over here, or this great scene over here. But how do I keep that tension throughout the middle of the book?
Yeah. You want to go first, Amy?
Oh, well, the same thing happens when in book 2. I mean, the dreaded book 2, when it's like somebody does something really, really well, and you love their first book, and then book 2 comes along, you're like, what happened? I just feel like that was a in-between thing, and I'm waiting for book 3 now. Children's literature, it's rampant. But what I find is, back to children's literature, Babe the Gallant Pig. So when he wants to be a sheepdog, and the things that he has to go through each time you come to what we call the primary noise and chaos creators, the wild dogs, or these conflicts that he has to overcome. Each one is at a higher level, because he learned something here. Now we have to go here, and it's something that's totally new, like just being able to go in front of the judges, and like, how do I talk to the sheep? And it's just increasing tension, and it has to be for a purpose. We see that character grow, and I just think they need to be actually legitimate. I don't know how else. What am I trying to say? That each of those little conflicts that increase the tension and increase, and let our character grow, they have to be reasonable. It's like something that character really would come across and have run into, that conflict that they would run into. Like when in Bridge to Terabithia, when Jesse decides that, the teacher's like, oh, let's go to this art exhibit, let's go. Do you want to invite Leslie? And, he absolutely adores the teacher, and he wants her all for himself. And he says, no. And that's when she goes and crosses the river or the stream in the storm and dies. I mean, that's a very defining moment. And it creates a lot of internal conflict as well as the external. Anyway, I think those things are golden. And
yeah, I think the murky middle is one of the hardest places to keep that tension, because a lot of the times we might be good at having the tension at the very beginning, or we kind of, and that, or we know what we're going to do at the very end. And that was something that I kind of struggled with on a project that I'm working on right now. Is like, my beginning's awesome, intense. My ending I know is going to be awesome, intense. But what do I do with that middle to make sure that I keep the reader reading, that they care? And so one of my strategies is I like to build to either, at the midpoint specifically, I like to build to either a false victory or a false defeat.
Good call.
And so for me, I feel like that kind of helps me at least conceptualize what kinds of obstacles do I want my character facing. Because obviously this inciting incident happens that just destroys my character or just blows up the world or does something where it's creating chaos. And in the hero's journey, usually you have that kind of debate of where the hero's like, do I do this or not? I'm thrown into this new world that I don't understand. And so you either want the obstacles that your character faces in the middle, because that's really what's going to happen in the middle is they're now going to face a ton of obstacles on their way towards hopefully resolving whatever this conflict is. So I always try to build to either, do I want obstacles that either make the character think like, okay, I got this, I'm handling this, I can do this. And then I think of like a good example of that is, I'm trying to think of like a false victory one. Would probably be like How to Train Your Dragon. I love that movie. And so like he's, in the middle of that story, he's like working with the dragon and he's building this relationship with the dragon and he's, learning how to fly with the dragon and he's learning all these cool tricks about how to tame dragons. And you're building up to this where it's like, okay, he's doing great. He's doing great. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, yay, you have this victory of where now you're the top dragon student. Now you're going to have to kill a dragon. And all of a sudden you're like, what? And it starts this downward trajectory towards, whatever that climax is going to be. And so building to like, yeah, where the character thinks, okay, yeah, this big thing happened to me, but I got this, I can handle it. And that's how we respond as people sometimes when, life throws these big stones in our own ponds and we're like, okay, I got this, I can handle it. And a lot of times the way that we try to handle it isn't always the best way. So we watch this character try to handle it and think they've got it. And then something happens where it's like, nope, you don't got it. You're not doing this way, how you're supposed to be doing it. And then it's a downslide towards act 3, kind of the chaos. Or you can do the opposite where it goes, the midpoint is a false defeat, which actually I probably see a little bit more often. So in the Save the Cat book, they talk about the movie Legally Blonde a lot. So she goes to Harvard. Yeah. And she's like, yay, I'm here. I'm in Harvard and I'm, an LA girl. And just bad thing after bad thing after bad thing keeps happening to where, the teacher humiliates her in class and nobody will let her in the study group. And she goes to this costume party and the costume party really is the midpoint there because it's this humiliating defeat where she's dressed up as like a bunny and nobody else is in costumes. And you're just like, you just feel so bad for her. You're like, oh my gosh, this is awful. But then that's that false defeat where she realizes, okay, everything I've been doing hasn't been working. Now we're going to try something different. And that's that moment where she goes, I'll show you how valuable Elle Woods can be. And then from there, you notice this upward trajectory where she starts doing well. She starts getting the right answer. She starts trying harder until you can get to whatever that tension is. So for me, to help keep the tension in the middle, I always try to think in terms of, am I going towards a false victory that's going to fall apart, or am I going towards a false defeat that's going to then hopefully shift?
And one of the things that I
have... Okay. We've only got about 5 minutes left, so let's try to get at least one question. I'm sure you have great things to say. That's the problem with these 50 minutes. It's been a great discussion.
Okay. Our first question comes from River. How do you keep tension in scenes while your characters are doing mundane things?
Well, you can be having a conversation at a dinner table and have the storm moving in, or, the unseen, the shark that's obviously out there, and that calm moment is just building, 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 because you know that that thing's coming, and do our people know it or do they not know it? We just have to make sure that our readers or our viewers know that what's not seen is almost scarier than what is seen.
Yeah, I always like to have a ticking clock in my story. I know that's something that they talk about a lot in thrillers, is there has to be some kind of like time crunch of like, why does this have to happen now? Or there's a deadline of I have to get this done before the party, or I have to get this done before this. And so for me in those scenes where I've got a character that's just kind of maybe doing something more mundane, I at least have them thinking about like, oh my gosh, I'm so worried. I only have 2 weeks left until this deadline, or having another character come in. And I like to utilize relationships for tension a lot too. So if it's a mundane thing, try to bring in another character who can add some relational tension. Or maybe this other character comes in and reminds them of like, oh, you realize you only have 2 weeks left, or I don't know, something like that. I always at least try to remind the audience in those scenes of like, at least my character's thinking about and worrying about this tension. So I'm trying to not let you forget that like there's this deadline, or there's this problem, or there's this fear, or this thing that the character's wrestling with.
I think we can squeeze in one more question.
All right. Our next question comes from Jennifer Hart. What are mistakes you've seen where an otherwise good book or movie fails?
Good question.
Very good.
I can think of movie fails, but I'm trying to think of how it applies to the question. I mean, things like Golden Compass, just that they destroyed that book with the movie. And they just, but I'm trying to think. It's just the difference that they did in the book, and the changes they made, turning the bad character into a good character because the actress didn't want to be seen as a bad character, which took away the impact of the conflict. I mean, she was literally killing children. And in the movie, that doesn't happen. And like, whoa. The other one is Beauty and the Beast live action. They did a pretty bad job of that one too.
Yeah, I think like you said, taming down the tension because of whatever reason, like not wanting to look like a bad guy. And it's like, but you have to.
Being politically correct. The wolf isn't really bad. By the way, they were friends at the end. The 3 pigs and the wolf. No.
The other big thing for me that tends to ruin it is if I don't know, I get mad when an author or movie breaks a promise that they made to me. And so for me, I'm like, if you're going to make promises that create tension of like, ooh, this is going to happen by the end or else, and then you get to the end and they're like, just kidding, there was no bomb, and you're like, what? Well, that feels like such a letdown. And so if
everybody's friends.
Yeah, or I remember I read the Selection series by Kira Cass, and I was so disappointed when I got to the end of the 3rd book, because the whole time you're waiting to like, it's because that one's another one that's kind of like The Bachelor a little bit too, and you're waiting for the end of like, who's he going to pick, and he doesn't pick anyone by the end. It's like you have to stay tuned for the next 2 books to figure out who he picks, and I was like, oh, come on.
Exactly.
So I'm like, you can't promise me that we're going to get some answers here and then not give me at least some answers.
Is that inciting incident has to be part of the hero moment at the end, unless you just have a no hero like Inception and you have no idea how it's going to end, or it just cuts off. Very frustrating.
Yeah, I'm like, don't make these tension promises to me and then break them. That makes me mad.
Although Inception, that was kind of a deliberate thing. It wasn't an accident thing.
Yeah, that was
Sorry, my table keeps moving because this big guy.
That's a victory with question marks, which fits the genre of that movie. But it's still a victory of some type that fulfills the character's journey while building toward that. We got about a minute left. Do you guys have any other panels or anything you want to be like, this is really cool that's coming up? Or where to find you on social media?
This is my last panel, and but I can be found at if you want to email me, saltzworks@gmail.com, SALTZWORKS. And I am probably going to start up start actively working in the Cracking the Story Code Facebook page. And so I didn't get that completely connected, but I will be working on that. And you can email me about it if you want to know more about when the textbook's being published and all the fun stuff coming up.
Yeah, so you can find me on my website, which is just LaniForbes.com, which is one of the benefits of having a weird first name like that. Is my website's pretty simple. You can find all my social media links through there. I'm pretty active on Instagram and Facebook, not so much Twitter, but I am very active on my website too. I try to post blog updates, and there's also a contact me section on my website. If you want to shoot me an email, if you have a question that we didn't get a chance to answer during this session, please feel free to send me a message through there. I'm pretty good about answering. And please check out my series, which book 2 comes out on Tuesday. So I'm really excited about that.
That is exciting.
I'm going to.
Yeah. My next panel is, I scrolled down too far. Dangerous Child Play and Successful Movies at 11. So that should be fun. You can find me at lpalmerchronicles.com is my website. All my social media is connected to there too. And thanks everyone for coming. If you guys haven't checked it out yet, I would definitely recommend checking out the conversation on the message board on Discord. There's someone who's a big fan of yours, Lani, and it's pretty great.
Oh, I have a hard time paying attention to, like, I can't have this open and the conversation at the same time. So I'll pop over to the conversation in just a minute. I promise.
So thanks panel, and thanks for our active audience. This has been really great, and hopefully you guys have a great rest of your Saturday. Bundle up if you need to, because it sounds like we're all in cold situation.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You did great.
Yeah, thank you, Amy, and thank you, Elle. That was so great.
Guys.